about to go inside to speak to two parents that had their two children taken away by the Department of Child Protection. Hello,
Everybody.
how are you? I'm Mal. I'm here to do an interview.
So in 2017, it was the week of Easter. It was the Wednesday before Easter weekend, and we had gone to the girls' school. We remember noticing that Zoe, our youngest, wasn't actually in the mass, and we left and went to see what was going on where she was. And we were met by the principal, who said to us, "You need to go home. Someone will be waiting for you there." Wouldn't tell us anything further. And then we went home. We were home maybe half an hour.
15 minutes, half an hour, something like that.
Long enough that we had Julianne on the phone. We were talking with her and let her know that something had happened, and we didn't know what, and that Zoe had been taken from the school. We had the doorbell ring, and 4 police cars and 2 DCP workers turned up. And they said to us, "We are here to take Ella. We have an order to remove your children." I froze for a minute, and Julianne was on the phone and she was asking what was going on. And I then panicked because everything was just, it made no sense.
No real explanation as to why, or background. Basically, it was, we're taking them, your court time is, I think it's about 1:30, 2 o'clock the following day.
So there's just literally no explanation.
Giving details there in the court.
Yeah, and they said to us that because it was the Easter weekend, they had to be in the court within 24 hours. So we were told to turn up at, as Steve said, 1:30, 2 o'clock that afternoon on the Thursday. And half an hour before the court session, they give you a pile of paperwork, and they say to you, "Well, this is why we've taken your kids, and that's all you get." So we didn't know. We didn't know anything. We didn't know what was going to happen with the children. I remember Ella panicking because she wanted to see Zoe, and Zoe wasn't allowed back in the house. They had a police officer outside in the car with her, and they told Ella to pack a bag for her and her sister.
So how were the kids feeling at that point?
I remember Ella was crying and screaming. She was hanging on to us, and she's going, "I don't want to go."
Yeah, what's going on? They had no understanding.
They didn't know.
They were 4, and Ella had just turned 7 at the time.
Before.
So I mean, at that age, they've got no understanding or whatnot. I mean, we
didn't know.
We knew what was happening, but we didn't know why or what was behind it until you get to court the next day and you get the paperwork.
And we were scared, so I can only imagine that they were frightened. I remember I hugged Ella because they wouldn't let us near Zoe, and I remember giving Ella a big hug and saying to her that it would be all right.
And what was actually going on at the time with Zoe? You know, what was the paperwork saying?
So when we went to court the next day, we were given the paperwork and we were told that we were causing physical and mental harm to Zoe by feeding her a gluten-free diet. And we were informed there that the kindergarten teacher had put a complaint in saying that she needed to be on gluten-free and there was no reason for her to be on gluten-free. Now, Zoe had been diagnosed with non-celiac gluten intolerance in 2015 by
late
Dr.
2015.
Yeah, late 2015 by Dr. Rupert Hines. He's a gastroenterologist in Melbourne who we'd been going to see after trying a couple here and not being happy with them because they were all interconnected with each other and the women's and children's. So we made the decision with the advice of Julianne, because we had been consulting with her and asking her what are her thoughts, that we would go to this guy in Melbourne. So Zoe had been unwell at the time. She'd been on and off food, which does happen because she had a fundoplication when she was
13 months
13
old.
months old.
She was born premature. She was almost 8.5 weeks or so prem, and she had struggled to fry, but she was also constantly regurgitating food. No one at that time had looked at any other potential causes. No one had suggested allergy related issues. Gluten intolerance wasn't
Even
consideration at that point. None of the doctors had gone down that path
that we
and
knew
even
of.
suggested it, that we were aware when they were talking to us. They never highlighted the potential of allergy related issues.
When the two kids were taken away, what was the feeling involved there and what actually
It was
happened?
hostile. Like, the department came in and it was hostile.
When you got armed police in your house, I mean, it feels very aggressive. You complete loss of control.
They invade everything, and then they
Utter
try.
confusion. You don't know why it's happening, what's happening. No one
No one
talks to you,
stops to
gives you any
talk.
explanation as to what. There's no questions asking.
They won't answer questions. If you ask them a question, they won't answer.
How many police were in the house at the time?
2 armed police.
Yeah.
There were 4 units
There
out
were
there.
2 detectives
two
and
standing
2 uniformed officers.
Yeah, so
One
4 came in.
One officer was with Zoe. The detectives came in. They also had their gun holsters, etc. on,
And they wouldn't let us take Ella to her room and pack her things. The police took Ella to her room and told her to pack her things. Ella was on a CPAP machine because at the time she had sleep apnea, and we packed it for her, but the department refused her to use it, so she wasn't allowed to use it for the time she was in care. It was only when she went to Steve's sister a couple of weeks later that his sister started getting her to use it again.
That must have been terrifying for you to know that your daughter, who needed the CPAP machine, wasn't able to use it.
It was, and we asked why she wasn't allowed to, and they said, oh, we'll ask our carers to make sure she uses it. But nobody was helping her do it, and she was 7, so she needed help to turn it on and help to put it on properly, but they wouldn't.
And Michelle, you also called in every day, didn't you?
We did every day, because they said when the judge actually said that we could contact them every day and ask how the girls were going and talk to the girls. And when we called in, we got told, stop asking how your children are, they're no longer yours, they're the state's kids. And apparently we gave up our rights of children when they came and took those kids, and that was what the social worker would tell us. And all I wanted to know was how they were going, what they were doing. And I remember on the Monday, the Easter Monday, we got to see the girls for the first time since they had been taken at the Woodville office. And it was the worst feeling in the world, because they came in absolutely dirty clothes. Their hair was already full of lice, and that's from 4 days of care.
Yes, completely
It was
unwashed,
matted.
unbrushed.
And they looked disgusting.
And Ella turned around and said, the carers had said, Mum and Dad had abandoned you, stop asking about them.
They had been asking where we were.
So the 2 girls were literally told that their parents had abandoned them.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you both were being told that.
Yeah, stop asking
Yeah.
about Mum and Dad, they've abandoned you.
And we were
And we
told
were
to stop
told to
asking about them because
stop
they were
asking
the
about them
state's
because-
kids now.
They're department kids, they're not your problem anymore.
So what happened from there? What did you do to try and get them back?
So we, with the help of Julianne Murray at the time, she's Julianne Dewar now, but she helped us fight and we went through the court processes, and the nightmare didn't stop.
We received the documentation on the first court session, and we went through that and responded to each and every one of their claims. We put in
Evidence.
information, blood tests from the doctors, emails and reports from the doctors. We'd been given Zoe an iron supplement which had been recommended by the dietitian and the gastroenterologist that Zoe had seen, because absorption of vitamins and minerals can be problematic with someone with gluten issues and the fundoplication. And we were using the syringes where you draw the liquid up, like the cough syrup for the young kids, and so on. She was only 4 at the time. We were drawing that up, you'd put it in the mouth and she'd squirt the syrup into her mouth and swallow it. And because the kindergarten had heard the word syringe, they assumed we were injecting Zoe with iron supplements, which apparently was quite a painful thing. No, I mean, it's a liquid syringe that's just used to measure the right dosage of the supplement to give it. It wasn't even a prescribed medication, it was an over-the-counter dietary supplement from the chemist. But they had claims like that in the paperwork, claims of the fabrication of the gluten intolerance and the need for the gluten-free thing. But we went back and broke down every point and responded to it. And I remember going back to court the following week and the judge turning around and saying, well, what a difference a week makes. This makes a lot more sense once he'd read and seen our responses and the physical evidence.
But it wasn't enough.
But he still had to follow the process of
they
applying for
decided
the
to
investigation
change
orders.
they decided to change their reasoning. So they added new reasons.
Each time we shot one reason down, and the next court session there'd be another reason added or another reason.
The DCP had basically in their paperwork said we were fabricating doctors' reports, we were fabricating blood tests. Not me was fabricating them. And then June 2017, in the next round of court paperwork, it was probably about the 10th round of court paperwork by then, there was a letter slipped into that pile from John Geraldini, who was, and I'm not sure if he still is at the Women's and Children's, but he was a child psychiatrist at the Women's and Children's who often is used by the department. He put a letter in that round of court paperwork stating that I had Munchausen's by proxy. So Julianne, when we got that paperwork in the court, Julianne questioned it in the court, and I remember her requesting that an independent assessment be done by an independent psychiatrist outside of the Women's and Children's, because I do remember them trying to get us to use one of the internal psychiatrists from the Women's and Children's.
Yeah, every assessment they wanted to send you to was to their psychologist, their psychiatrist. They want to do everything in-house. They don't ever like sending out for independent reviews. The other thing I really clearly remember about that letter from John Geraldini is he was quoting his own research papers to try and prove his point that he was correct.
Yes.
Well, you're never going to disagree with yourself, are you? If you really had any basis, you'd be quoting research from other people rather than yourself. Well, you're never going to disagree with yourself, are you? If you really had any basis, you'd be quoting research from other people rather than yourself.
With Dr. Jules Begg, he's at Hope Valley, and he did a full assessment of myself, and he disagreed with Geraldini's diagnosis. The judge ordered that the department give files over, and we had to also give files over, and then I had to go and do 3 sessions with him so that he could get an accurate understanding.
Whereas Dr. Geraldini
did it on the department paperwork.
Yeah, did it all off paperwork, didn't decide that it was a good idea to meet and discuss and have several sessions like that to go
Not that
through?
time round, no. He decided that he was just going to put it in this court paperwork.
There been no
2017,
conversations
no.
with Geraldini in 2017
No.
whatsoever. We met him once in late 2013, early 2014 for about half an hour, and that's the only contact we've ever had with Dr. Geraldini.
And I remember at that point he turned around and he remembered me when I was a child, and that made me raise questions because I didn't remember him as a child. But he actually made the comment that I remember seeing you and your family as a child.
How old would you have been when you met him?
Well, after talking to my parents and my grandmother, I found out that I would have been roughly 7 or 8 when I'd had first interactions with him. I don't know whether I blocked it out or whether it was just being a child. I didn't realise that my mother had interactions with the department, and there had been investigations regarding me and my sisters.
So Michelle, the first time that you knew about this past stuff in terms of the department was when Geraldini raised it with you.
Yes.
And talk again about lack of independence. If you've got history with people going back through the hospital system or other things, where's the independence there?
And that's what Julianne was able to argue in the courts, that, you know, that's nothing other than bias, because how can it be independent if he'd already had dealings with my mother? It's not independent, and it's not confidential either. It's not confidential, no. And you can't make an independent decision on a person's capability if you've got past family dealings. When we first met him in 2013, late 2013, early 2014, it was my thought that he already had come to a decision based on past dealings with my own family that, you know, I must have been like my mother. And just because a person grows up in a household that he deems is different or difficult doesn't mean we're all going to be our parents. And I don't know, he must have a good memory, because I don't know how he would have remembered me as a child when I'm an adult. I'm, you know, not the same person, or I'm not the same in shape, size, thought process. You know, I've grown up, and to come to the same conclusions that because I grew up in a household that had people in DCP inquiry must mean that I'm a bad parent. How do you come to that judgment?
Well, more than that, I mean,
Before you've even spoken to me.
And Munchausen's by proxy syndrome is very rare in the community.
And
there's some questions, but it states very clearly it's not hereditary or genetic. So just because of understandings of parents doesn't necessarily flow onto children.
John Geraldini had accused my mother of having Munchausen's by proxy, and whilst DCP never was able to fully investigate and he was never able to fully diagnose, there was the accusation that she had Munchausen's.
Or
suggestions, however you want to look at it, it was there. And I remember that the half an hour we had with Geraldini, I felt like crawling skin by the end of it, because for him to know me as well as he claimed, but me have no memory of him, makes me wonder how his memory is so good. Because
well, I remember in the interview, in the time spent with John Geraldini, he'd ask a question and I'd give an answer, and he would try and reword that answer, throw in, I suppose, change the wording to give it different meanings, or different emphasis with it. And again, it was nothing less than attempted intimidation or manipulation, I felt. You weren't giving the answers that were wanted, so he's trying to suggest you change them. And no, the answers I gave were genuine and heartfelt answers. I'm not going to change the way I think just because someone suggests differently.
So he felt that I had Munchausen's because Zoe was sick, and because she had been on and off in and out of hospital when she was little, because Zoe had sleep apnea, and we pushed for Zoe to be diagnosed when she was little. When she came home to start with, she would turn blue. And
blue around the lips and the fingertips. And
months, the hospital told us that we were panicked parents and that there was nothing wrong with her. And it was only when we continued to insist that something was wrong that they ran tests, and
conducted a sleep study, and they found over 70 apnea events an hour for Zoe, which is quite high. Understand anything over probably about 10 to 15 is considered high, and something that should have some form of treatment or intervention.
And she was only months old at the time, and then she was in and out because of the reflux, which wasn't reflux as such. There may have been an element of reflux in it, but she was in and out because of the celiac or non-celiac gluten intolerance. And so Geraldine had painted a picture that I liked being in the hospital with her, and it gave me a sense of achievement, and so I must have Munchausen's.
He's very careful at the way he words things. He never outright accuses, he suggests.
He suggests that. In 2017, he didn't even speak with us. He just wrote a letter saying outright that I had Munchausen. And it was, we had the unfortunate events of dealing with Geraldine because of circumstances that he brought us to having involvement with DCP in 2013-2014, which they deemed us, after a short investigation, that we were no problems and we were a loving family. We had roughly six workers, social workers, circled through in that time. And I remember the last one, Monica, she actually wrote a support letter for us when they came knocking again in 2017, saying that she'd closed the case and that she deemed that we were no risk to our children. And had we not had DCP involved in 2013, 2014, I wouldn't have known Geraldine's tactics or even had the pleasure of having to deal with him again.
You would have had no history.
Would have had nothing.
Or understanding of the history with your parents.
I wouldn't have known.
I mean, that's a breach of confidentiality in itself, the fact that he's talking to you about your parents' medical history or suggestions.
Yeah, his suggestions of things. So, and we had the unpleasant dealing with both DCP and Geraldine because of events that unfolded at the Women's and Children's in that time frame. So I was arrested and charged with aggravated causing harm to a minor because I gave Zoe lactulose, which was told by all the nurses, they call it sugar syrup and lolly water. They give a little bit to the kids when they're distracting them, when they're about to give them a test or wanting to calm them. Yes, and I had been giving it to Zoe because she'd been in the hospital for some time. I had been giving it on the understanding that it was comforting her, not hurting her. But in fact, it was actually hurting her. It was making her sick.
In the same time frame, the hospital
had been
providing the substance again when tests were done or bloodlines needed to be
That's right.
changed.
And so I pled guilty to aggravated causing harm to a minor. I was not convicted, and Geraldini in 2017, the department and Geraldini both said I was convicted. I was not convicted of any charge. I did 2
So
years.
why did you plead guilty?
Because the lawyers advised me that it was the right thing to do, because I did give Zoe the substance, even though I didn't do it to hurt her, and I didn't do it out of anything other than trying to comfort her. So I did plead guilty to it because they advised me it was the best thing to do. Because I wasn't hiding the fact that I had given it to her. I just didn't understand what I was giving her was hurting her. And when the nurses and the doctors and everyone tell you that it's sugar syrup and it's comfort and lolly water, and they give her a little bit every time, you think that you're doing the right thing when you're trying to comfort your daughter. They put us on a safety plan.
Your safety plan is as far as it went,
and they came out for a dozen times or so, and then deemed that we were caring and loving parents for our children, and they were in a safe environment.
yeah, I mean, they basically wrapped up and were happy to walk away well before the court case.
So the court case didn't
had
finish
its
till
sounding in court,
2015.
and there the judge stated that it was a mistake and
It wasn't
no
born out of
malice
malice.
or other issues in it, and again, no conviction recorded due to those facts.
I did 2 year good behaviour because I had to accept that I had done something wrong, so I did do a 2 year good behaviour, and I checked in with the police station, and we had no further involvement with any court or DCP after 2015
Until they turned up
until they
on that
turned up
Wednesday
again,
in 2017.
and they took our kids.
And I mean, straight away in the court, I think it was, not sure if it was first or second page, but the documentation they provided us in that first court session,
Says I was
there is
convicted.
no anonymity in people making reports. It stated very clearly who had made the report and what the report was about. It was there in black and white. So they tell anyone involved in mandatory reporting courses and things like that it's all anonymous. It's not.
It's not. Once
It is
goes
very
to court,
much listed in court documents.
you are provided
names,
the name,
Addresses,
everything.
locations.
Location of where they report it. Everything is given to the families.
So to sort of be pushing that line, either they've made quite a mistake in including that information in the court documentation, or they're actually misleading people when they're providing training around mandatory reporting and other
And I remember
setups of
one
the
of the
DCP.
reasons they justified taking our kids was because I was supposedly convicted, not convicted, but convicted of aggravating causing harm to a minor.
Well, one of the issues John Geraldini had in 2013 is that the department didn't have an investigation order. They didn't have any court orders. They couldn't force parental assessments to be done with Geraldini and his department there at the Women's and Children's.
And he actually said that to us in his interview, that he actually said that to us, because he was...
If it was up to him, they'd have orders and would be forced to doing parental assessments with them. Again, if they're using their own people, where's the independence? They're just going to get the answers that they want from their own people.
That's right. But yes, it is our belief that if the 2013 events didn't happen, then it is most likely the 2017 events wouldn't happen. But then again, who knows? They may very well have still happened.
But I guess they added weight to the 2017 events.
Yes, they
didn't
used that as
They
one of the
did.
reasons. They used that as one of their justifiable reasons. But then we were able to show in court that if there was such an issue in 2013, then why did they close the case? Why did they deem that we were a safe family if there was such... If they were going to then use that again in 2017, and there at the time the lawyers actually said, well, they're not using it, they're just stating that we've had prior involvement. And then we were able to track down the support, or the social worker, sorry, I call them support workers, but the social worker who was last with our case last in 2017, and the one that deemed that we no longer needed involvement. We were able to track her down in 2017, and she provided a court document for us saying that she had closed the case and that we were of no danger to our children.
I mean, this is some of what we've been asking when, again, you've got documentation, you've got scientific reports and things. How can that be ignored and overridden for their reasoning? And
they said that was easy because we fabricated the lot. They weren't believing our gastro doctors, they weren't believing the blood tests, they weren't believing the evidence, they weren't believing the dietitian.
I don't know of too many medical practitioners who ignore their often decades of training and experience and perform tests or procedures on people just because of a parent's say-so. They use all of that information they've gathered over many, many years to make an informed decision on their own observations.
That was actually Julianne's comment in one of the court sessions.
To ignore doctors' reports, doctors' diagnosis and things, it's really a slap in the face to some of these people that have spent decades gaining their qualifications. They're completely ignoring that experience and expertise.
So in 2017, when the kids were taken away, what did it take to get them back?
It took us fighting.
5.5 months.
Yep.
And basically, because Zoe was receiving a gluten-based diet, in care, she was getting sicker and sicker as we went on. And the carer, my sister, thankfully they did get into family-based care after a couple of weeks, because our lawyer Julianne fought very strongly for that to occur. Daughter was sexually assaulted in DCP care, but in quite a turnaround with Dr. Moore. He'd run the test and he'd actually found that she did have the markers for gluten issues, and he made it very clear at that appointment and in the letter he wrote following that appointment that he felt it was entirely suitable that Zoe should have been on a gluten-free diet, and she certainly showed the signs, and the scientific medical
couldn't be argued, basically.
Proved that it was suitable and definitely not a fabricated issue.
That's right.
As the department had suggested. He
noted in his second report who put her back on a gluten diet. He noted that it was Dr. Janine T that put her on the gluten diet, and he recommended that she go straight back onto a gluten-free diet. The department ignored that report for almost a month.
Yeah, a month, but it took us pushing, and again Julianne pushed to actually get a copy of that report from them. A month after,
saying they didn't have it.
Yeah, a month after we found that they did have it, and they'd had it within a couple of days of the appointment that she found.
And Steve's parents were at that appointment and had heard that he recommended her going back on a gluten-free diet, but the department wouldn't action that.
You think if you were a social worker and you had a case with a child who had potential of celiacs or gluten intolerance, you'd do some research around that and find out what that meant. But obviously none of that had occurred had no understanding of it. He asked at the time, can you give me some kind of brochure to explain this?
So what was the impact of all this on the kids?
So it was quite extreme. We actually have a video of Zoe begging, is the best description, on the bathroom floor one night where she's in pain and she's crying. And I remember right at the very end of the video, she looks at my sister-in-law and she says, "Can you sit with me?" Because she's just thrown up and she's just
remembering Zoe's
so much pain.
had fundification, so vomiting can actually
Can be bad.
be dangerous or life-threatening if that fundification has too much pressure applied to it. It can rip and cause significant dramas.
And I remember that video, and
So effectively, feeding her the gluten had made her sicker and sicker and was encouraging, or she had the need to vomit, which again,
and she was
potentially
all
threatening.
blistered and bruised, and there were photographs. We were being given photographs of how bad Zoe was.
We were also told she was often too exhausted or too fatigued
To
to
go
actually
to
attend
school.
kindergarten
So
and
she
attend the
was,
schooling. Even though it was only a couple of days a week, she was too tired to do that.
and my sister-in-law was emailing the department regularly and telling them this, and they're like, you just keep feeding her that gluten. You're not to put her back on gluten-free.
Thankfully, she'd kept diaries going of the food that Zoe was getting, but also the symptoms and
And
her
tracks
reaction
of all
to
her
that.
emails. She kept all copies.
But in the
of it.
meantime, our eldest Ella was just watching her sister
become sick.
become sicker and
And not
stressing
be able
and
to
worrying
do-
about what
She
was going
couldn't
on
do
there.
anything
and
to stop it.
couldn't do
While
anything
she was
to help
trying
her.
to understand why she couldn't go home. And I remember we were on FaceTime with the girls, and Ella would say to us, when can we come home?
So what was the impact like on both of you while this was happening?
You were still
Well,
trying to
soul
work.
destroying. Yeah, trying to work because you still had to provide an income to support everything,
Yeah.
and also to fight the department
It was
takes every
taking
cent you've
everything.
got.
It takes your all your energy. It takes, for some days you sit there questioning your
But,
insanity,
I mean, it leaves you feeling completely helpless in.
because they try and separate you. They
But
try
you-
and
you-
divide
they
your
do
family
try
and
and
friends.
divide you from your families and friends. They come in and give one side to a story, which makes you sound quite terrible, and try and sort of turn family and friends against you, so you don't have any
A
real
support
support
network.
mechanisms.
So you just feel completely helpless.
You
You
do.
do. But also, I mean, for me, I was completely confused because I suppose I've always been quite a logical thinker. If you got blood tests and you got scientific reports, how can you just ignore those? And I thought, surely if we can show we've got these, that will answer the questions and resolve. But they wouldn't.
They just
Still
kept
wouldn't look
changing the goalposts.
They ignored that report for close to a month before they admitted they'd found it.
And that
and
was
then-
only because Nick Xenophon had
Well,
gotten
no,
involved.
then it still took another 3 weeks after that report had come to us for them to call a meeting to discuss putting Zoe back on gluten-free diet. So it ended up about 6 to 7 weeks after Dr. Moore had confirmed that it was appropriate and suitable for her to be on a gluten-free diet and helpful for her. 7 weeks later, they were only just talking to us about it. At that meeting, we'd seen Senator Xenophon, as it was at the time, Nick, and he came along and tried
He
to help
dropped
us.
everything that
Dropped
day.
everything, and so give him credit for that.
Because the
and
other thing,
felt
just,
really supported, and
yeah, the other thing
there.
just quickly was the department don't like you recording any of their interviews. They don't like you coming in with lawyers.
they don't even like you
They
having
won't-
notepads.
You're not allowed to take a notepad. You're not allowed to make any type of recording. And they don't like. So when we went in, they said, "Oh, we can bring a support person to our meeting, but it's not allowed to be your lawyer." That's the rules straight out. And we took Nick Xenophon with us.
Nick kindly agreed to come along when he heard we had a meeting.
And it turns out that he is some patriot of celiac. Remember?
Society,
yeah, the Society of Celiac. So he had a really good understanding of what was required of somebody on a gluten-free diet. And they didn't really want him making any notes of his meeting with us, but he said, "But no, I'm making the notes." He
But
said,
he-
"If you're
he
allowed
also-
to, then I am."
After the meeting, he wrote a letter to the minister at the time, who I believe was Susan Close at the time, or not entirely sure whether that's
Asking
correct.
her
It would have been
Review.
Susan Close.
Yeah, basically he wrote a letter asking her to review it, and went back to court 2 weeks after that, and again
They were still insistent
sort
on
of
keeping the
insistent,
kids.
but our lawyer Julianne pointed out she had this report from Dr. Moore naming Dr. T, because they were saying we can get Dr. T on the stand saying about medical background of these children, and she sort of said, well really, you got this report from David Moore stating that she is gluten intolerant, and Dr. T is the one who put her back on a gluten-based diet, which certainly could cause harm and issue. And so how would that work in the court, do you think? You wouldn't have a chance of her getting up and backing that up when she's been listed to not do the right testing at the start, but also
As
putting-
the one doing it.
putting a child at risk and harm.
So we'd
And
gotten
after
over
that-
John Geraldini, we'd gotten over the accusations that I had been charged, not charged. We'd gotten over the fact that that we were harming Zoe by having her on a gluten-free diet. We'd gotten over the fact that Ella was had an autistic diagnosis fabricated. We had gotten over all of these hurdles to then get our daughter, to see our daughter at the end sick and struggling and not coping, and then have our, at that time, 7-year-old daughter so withdrawn that she didn't trust anybody and she'd flinch if you touched her. And to see all of that and then still be told that we weren't allowed our children. And it was going to trial. They were going to take us to trial despite all of this evidence. And it was only at the 11th hour, as Julianne calls it, the 11th hour, that they decided that we were going to get our kids home. And we had
in the meantime,
a video,
we did get the video,
and the judge saw the video.
which the judge saw and agreed,
ordered-
you're making this kid sicker and sicker, this needs to be resolved. But my sister had been feeling terrible the whole time because she was
forcing her to make her
forcing-
sick.
being forced to feed her substances she could see was clearly making Zoe sick. And that was also clearly upsetting Ella. So she was struggling with that side of it, and
And Ella was becoming
there was
angry.
no offers of support, or felt like no one was listening to her in the department for her requests for reviews or someone to
And
come and look at what was going on.
Ella would get angry, and then they'd turn around and say, well, we can take them away from you if you like. Instead of trying to support, it was, we'll take them away from you if you like.
What's been the impact now with the two girls, with Ella and Zoe? How are they today?
So it's been a long journey.
We still end
we're
up with
still
Zoe in our bed 2 or 3 nights a week because
afraid of the
she
dark.
is afraid of the dark, wants to know where we are all the time. She's
Wants to know it's going to be
desperately
okay.
scared of the risk of separation.
If doorbell rings, she panics. If she doesn't know that there are people coming, she panics.
By going interstate, the department
Accused us
accuse you
of
of doctor shopping rather than just getting a second opinion. Adelaide is a very small town in terms of some of the specialists and whatnot. There aren't that many specialists in the paediatric fields in some areas.
that don't know each other.
You
or
have to
interact
actually go
with each
interstate
other.
to find other doctors that aren't all tied
That's
in
right.
together and tied into the women's and children's.
Do you feel that it was South Australia that was quite negligent, towards
Yes.
you both, towards your case?
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And the fact that I remember in one of the many court documents they gave us, apparently I didn't have a hysterectomy because we didn't have it in the public system. That was what they accused us of, that I was fabricating my own hysterectomy because I had it in the private system. And how can you fabricate a hysterectomy? That was one of our questions.
Yes,
We
'cause,
went, it doesn't make sense.
at the time you had a diagnosis of cervical cancer and a
Well, the
hysterectomy.
cervical cells that
Yes,
were
the
turning
cervical cells were
cancerous.
detected, and had the hysterectomy, but because it wasn't in the public system, apparently it
It
didn't
was
happen.
fabricated.
Even though it was done through
So
a
yes,
private hospital
the
using
system
private
let
health
us down.
insurance.
The public system has let us down because if you choose to use anything other than the public system in Adelaide, you're doctor shopping or you're fabricating it.
So just with the class action that's happening now, can you tell us about
Yeah,
that?
so we are starting one. So we've been suing the state ourselves as a family since 2018, and that's been dragging on because they keep finding new reasons to drag that on.
Well, we have actually received a favourable judgment
Yeah, we
supporting
have.
our reasoning and arguments through the court.
We
and
have,
that
and
came out in July last year.
And so recently, because of the state dragging on our claim to sue the state, we set up a petition for support for families to come forward, put their stories about what had happened, and also support us trying to get justice for our family. And from that, we had quite a few families coming forward. So the decision was made by Julianne and ourselves that Julianne would partake in the class action. We would try and find families and get them to come forward, put their stories, and if they wanted to be part of the class action, we would do that. And so we are looking for families that want to be a part of this, that have had a bad experience or had their children removed and they shouldn't have been removed, to be part of this class action here in Adelaide. And so far we've already had quite a number of families coming forward. We're up to about 30 families that have got stories so far. We understand we're still going through all of them and contacting everyone. But I think it's going to be quite a big action once it kicks off, and we're hoping to get that up and running within the next month.
The scary
or so.
part of it, a lot of the stories we've heard to date are very similar in that it's accusations of Munchausen's, which if you read academic documentations on, is apparently quite a rare occurrence. But it's almost, South Australia must be a bit of a hotspot or a vortex with the number of cases that we found have actually been suggested occur here.
How does it feel to have so many families step forward to support your case?
It's been overwhelming a little bit.
Well, there are two sides to it. It is
Very
overwhelming.
sad.
It feels very supportive, but also feels very sad that so many people out there
Have been
hurt like this and through this hell. And it appears to come back to the department
Same group of people.
same group of supporting doctors, etc.
That's what we found. There's the same group of people involved in every case, every time. So there's the department, there's the women's and children's, there's John Geraldini, and then there is often one other player in it. And for a while, we've seen cases from the ones I've spoken to. There's Janine T, who's been involved, and then there's been this other person, Terry Donald. He was involved in a number of these cases, but there all seems to be the same group of people involved.
Yeah, particularly John Geraldini.
He's very much
a very common factor that keeps coming.
Department, Women's and Children's, John Geraldini. They seem to all be, and then there's that extra person, and it's like, how can this happen? So for us, yes, it's been very scary and very sad to see so many families have been hurt already, but we are still looking for more to come forward if they will.
And I know from a lot of the media coverage you see and read, you get the impression that the department is quite opposed to change, doesn't really show any desire to learn from mistakes or issues, but we just hope that by putting our story out there, it might stop this happening to another family down the track, but maybe there will be some learning, some growth.
That's right.
Because in the whole thing, I mean, yeah, just if they never appear to admit that they're wrong.
So what have you both learned through this whole process? You know, what have you learned about yourselves, or what have you learned about the department?
That we're stronger than we thought. You give your kids a hug every day because you don't know what tomorrow's going to bring. We have seen our almost 13-year-old break, both mentally and physically.
You break over and over again with what happened to her.
It's only recently, since we got her some special trauma treatment, which isn't in the state, of course, that we've realised just how hurt she was, and that's made us even more determined to fight for what's right. But don't stop questioning is one thing we've learnt, is you don't stop questioning. Don't stop asking why. Don't stop. Just because they tell you to stop, don't stop. Because usually there's an answer, and
Yeah, they're
people
your kids.
just
You're
don't like
entitled
it.
to inquire about their well-being and
You're
what's
entitled.
going on. And
Yeah, you have the right to keep asking, and it's taught us to be stronger. And
Piers, the department, has the same playbook. They used to alternate between visits and conversations. One conversations, they'd be your best mates,
what can we
making
do
it sound
for
like
you?
they really want to support you. The next conversation, it would be the bad cop routine, where they'd come in and they'd wrap you over the knuckles about anything and everything,
Yeah,
and then alternate back to best mates the next one, and bad cops the following one.
it's sickening.
It's sort of almost a very scripted playbook.
But I guess that's taught us to now appreciate each day. Know that you've got to fight. You've got to keep fighting, because families, it's too easy for them to come and destroy them. It's too easy for someone to make an accusation and go and destroy your family. Like Zoe, she loves dancing, and she loves just being able to express herself, and that makes me really happy to watch, because she's healthy. She's hurt and she's got trauma, but she's healthy. And Ella, now that she's on the road to recovery, like her psychiatrist has said, she's got a long way to go. We all do.
Yeah, unfortunately, Ella was hurt both
But she was
physically
hurt
and
physically
mentally.
and mentally. So for us, it's hard, because you want to hug them and you want to go, it's going to be okay.
But it's a trauma that keeps coming back around. I don't think you ever get over it.
No,
It does make you more determined to
fight.
push for change.
Has your trust in just the government and people been broken, do you think?
It
Certainly
has.
it affects your trust.
Yeah.
When you're trying to explain, put your story forward to these people, and again,
or
I had the
talk
whole
to
confusion
new
of
doctors.
logical information, scientific reports just being overlooked and ignored. It's like what you're saying has no meaning,
Yeah,
it has no trust, so you sort of lose confidence in yourself.
you do.
You think, what's wrong with me? I can't express myself appropriately. I can't put it into words that people understand.
When the girls started a new school, it's like, oh, how much do you tell people, because you're afraid they're going to judge you differently? Or when we found a psychologist to give the girls therapy as soon as they came home, it's like, but are they going to look at you bad because you've got a Munchausen's diagnosis? Even though I don't have one, it's in paper, so I must have one. And when we needed a GP, because obviously the GP we had didn't want to continue with us after we got the girls home, because apparently we're department people now. It's like, how much do you tell them? So you do have to begin, you have to put some level of trust in people, But then that's really hard to do because you trusted the people you were already with. And so all of them walked away when the department get involved because they think that you must be negligent or you must be hurting, or so it was really hard. But we found out which doctors were really there for the long haul because they're the ones who are still with us now, like the gastroenterologist and the dietitian and
It's a really good GP who
the GP
knows the background. And
yeah, we found a GP who we gave him the information, we gave him the files, and we said, here, read. We'll come back in a couple of days and we'll have a conversation. If you want to take us on, then great. If you don't, we can understand that too, because that's the only way to explain what's happened, because people think, oh, you know, department involved. We have got two beautiful girls, one who is loving life to the full, and for us we are fighting for justice, fighting for our family, fighting for the rights that they had taken because their childhood was taken.
yeah, all the time dealing with the trauma that both of them still suffer, and we suffer too.
We do suffer. And then we are fighting for families now that haven't had a voice, and so that's why we started the class action, because there are too many families that have been hurt and haven't had a voice. We have an almost 13-year-old and almost 11-year-old, and they are, one's high school, one's year 5, and they have different challenges, different needs, different lives. Our oldest has a service dog who supports her through her psychiatric needs at the moment because she's been left with psychiatric needs because of what happened to her. We are still fighting for answers to why she was sexually assaulted in care. How can a 7-year-old have that happen? So yeah, six years since the girls have been taken, and we're
that
still
happened
fighting.
within a couple of weeks in the state system. Imagine what would have happened had they not been moved into family care. When they did, what would months or years in the system have sort of looked like for them? That's quite a horrendous thought in itself.
Today, what you've heard is of two parents that had their two children forcefully taken by the Department of Child Protection. One was sexually assaulted in care, and one became sicker and sicker when she wasn't allowed to have her gluten-free diet. They are still trying to fight for a class action, and we hope that this goes ahead.